nice to be in London. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for having us here. My name is Natsai Audrey Chieza, and I want to talk today about designing with living systems. So bacteria, fungi, algae, and yeast, these microorganisms are responsible for some of the most fundamental life processes that make it possible for you and I to breathe the oxygen that keeps us alive, or to sort of decompose organic matter, and therefore making the cyclical basis of our existence on this planet also possible. And as human beings, we've been, quite aware of this power of these microorganisms for a very long time. It's responsible for the food cultures that have stemmed from fermentation all across the world. And through modern science and technology, we've also figured out how to leverage the capabilities of the microbial world for vaccinations, the sort of pharmaceuticals that make it possible for us to fight diseases that otherwise would be impossible. But over the last 20 years, we've also become quite good at figuring out how to harness the power of these microorganisms to create new materials, the kinds of materials that are going to effectively help us decarbonize our value chains, and bring tailored biosolutions across the world in a way that's distributed, and hopefully, if we design it that way, in a way that's ethical as well as equitable. And fundamentally, because we're looking at a new technology stack, designing with living systems, we get to create the supply chains, if you like, from scratch. And my team and I have been thinking about what that looks like in real terms. How do we design with these organisms in a way that allows us to not just decarbonize and divest from fossil fuels, but actually create the kind of futures I think most of us want. And so in 2023, I got the dream project, a brief from a project partner to develop a retail platform that showcases the power of these microorganisms. The charge was sort of very straightforward. Create a biodesign shop that makes it possible for people to buy products that are made from biotechnology. And so my team and I set about building an entire website to bring these features to life. And what was really fascinating about it is, for the client and for our project partner, it was create a shop. But what we understood that we were doing on the back end is deciding how we design certain values into the multi-layers that make it possible for somebody to be able to go online and see something that's made with biology. And purchase it. You have to remember that in 2023, when we launched this was at a time where we'd heard and read so much information about biotech startups that were launching new products with brands, and yet the public hadn't really interfaced with them in a meaningful way. And because of the way that industry works, a lot of the times, even if you were holding a garment, for example, that had been made by a microbe that is engineered to create a certain enzyme or a certain fiber, you were none the wiser, because fundamentally that brand didn't necessarily want you to know that. They just wanted to change their value stream on their back end. But we decided that, look, if we're going to create this space, we want it to be design-led, we want it to be radical, holistic, mindful, and transparency was really important. And so as we built the value chain behind this, all of our project partners who made it possible, from journalists to technologists, scientists, design studios, individual designers, all sorts of different actors came together to make NPOL a reality, and in a way that I think allows us to start thinking not just what do we create with these new material systems, but what are the kinds of relationships do we want to begin to foster so that we can get the best outcomes that are possible. And when we first started the project, it wasn't apparent to us that there were so many products on the market that lived up to a lot of the values that we wanted to bring forwards. And so we also understood our job as being designers who are going to create products with these emerging materials. And those became our sort of NPOL originals, R&D effectively happening in our studio, looking at different materials to say, hey, this is available. What could we possibly make with this that's going to make sense under this rubric? But by the time the project came to a close, we also realized that there was a unique opportunity to start tapping into other creators who were making their own products. And so NPOL became this multi-brand experience where you can shop from a host of different actors, all of the different kinds of new possibilities that these microorganisms are bringing into play. So I just wanted to show you a couple of those. Now, starting with the gathering lamp, which we were very excited to work on, effectively partnering with a biotech company in America called Biomason, and our design and manufacturing partners here in London, Mito Mondays. And together, we worked with a material that is basically made with microbes that know how to turn sand into stone. And they do that using very minimal resources and massive reduction in carbon. Primarily, Biomason is growing this technology so that they can transform the construction industry, one of their biggest sources of carbon emissions. But we wanted to tell that story through a different kind of product and to understand the efficacy of this material in other use cases. And so we partnered with Mito Mondays to make a lamp that is designed for disassembly. Every component can be recycled or reused. And it made, a really beautiful story about this very humble material and the ways in which you can use design to elevate it and to create something that is desirable. These stories matter not just for a general public, but for the biotech entrepreneurs who are wanting to fundraise and bring people on their journey to make the big transformative change, because it's actually really difficult for them to talk about their innovations in a way that can be compelling. And so we understood that the service that we were providing through this web shop wasn't just going to allow designers to understand the potential of these new materials, it was also going to enable these startups to think about storytelling in a slightly different way, but in a way that is going to capture people's imagination. The second NPOL original, and perhaps one that's much closer to my heart, given that we were leveraging technology that our R&D studio has been developing over the years, is the Exploring Jacket. And this is a special project because I started the research as an independent designer back in 2011. And in this moment, we had the opportunity to bring together a whole range of different stakeholders to stress test the technology and to really ask fundamental questions about how do we scale this in a way that is going to move the needle. So where we moved our bench scale research of fermenting microbes that produce pigments to dye textiles to bioreactors that basically enabled us to grow a lot of biomass to dye the textiles at scale. We worked with BDC, Biorenewables Design Center in York to do that scale up. And the project became a really important experimental piece to understand who needs to be at the table in the United Kingdom for us to start thinking about how we scale biomanufacturing. And so we have a microbe that produces pigment. It does that using very minimal resources in terms of water and no toxins, which is a very important factor in our industrial manufacturing. And if you grow it on textiles, it dyes the textiles and leaves a very beautiful print on the textile. And the opportunity here was to dye as much textiles as possible to be able to make garments. Prior to that, we were working with very small-scale experiments in the lab, and so the question became, okay, we want to make a jacket. How much fabric do we need to be able to do that? How do we actually scale up the fermentation in the bioreactor to be able to enact that? And then through that experimentation, we managed to get about 30 meters of fabric, which in essence allowed us to make 4 jackets, which was such a major milestone in terms of research and who else was involved. But it shows you the kind of work that needs to happen for you to get even to that stage. What I think for me was super special about this, and people say to me, what's the favorite part of the jacket, or, you know, and I sort of say it's the label. It's the promise that we're making to the consumer about the efficacy of this product because of how much work has had to go in to getting us to a place where we can say that you can put this and dry clean it and the color is not going to fade. Or that when we're thinking about our carbon emissions, that we have data now to support why this is a better process than before. It's not just an intuitive practice. And so what we were able to learn from the research that went into creating those jackets that are available on Normal Phenomena of Life is a life cycle analysis that told us all of the good things that are working about our process, but also where we could have room for improvements. And so when we had the opportunity to work with a biotech company in the UK called Evoluta through an Innovate UK grant, we sort of relished at a chance to improve some of the issues that were coming up in our process. And it's not issues that are sort of unique to this particular process. Anybody who's fermenting microbes at scale to make new materials has one conundrum, which is, where is all the sugar going to come from? This organism, Streptomyces pseudicolor, is very well characterized in science because primarily we use it for antibiotics. This is our organism that we're using to dye our textiles. And, you know, it relies on sucrose that is coming from industrial supply chains, from monocultures in places that we don't want to see land destroyed to support this industry. And so everybody who's working in this is talking about feedstocks, which isn't terribly sexy, but for us, it's like, let's talk about feedstocks. Because otherwise, we're just displacing harm from fossil fuels to other land-based processes. And so the real issues with the sugar that the microbes depend upon to be able to ferment and create these beautiful pigments is that feedstocks, and definitely this tracks according to our LCA, make up about 50% of the actual cost. And this is problematic because if you're trying to have cost parity with the fossil fuel industry and other kinds of industries, you're just not going to make it based on that alone. Virgin sugars are dominant in terms of what everyone is using to ferment all manner of things, which means a reliance on global commodity markets. Scaling demand for this industry as it's projected is basically going to ask us to sacrifice land the size of Virginia to making this happen. And I don't think we're living in a world where we can do away with an inch of biodiversity. Feedstocks are also competing with other food markets, which is really problematic. And then with climate change, we're already seeing volatility in harvest. And so we had a sort of realization that perhaps the opportunity here is to sort of understand that this microorganism is in the lab, it's isolated, it's a monoculture, it needs sugar. It's also a microorganism that you find in the soil. This teaspoon of soil contains about 1 billion different kinds of microbes, and they've evolved over 4.5 billion years to be able to work together to do some of these things like decompose organic matter. And so what if we could tap into that inherent intelligence of the organism rather than treating it in isolation in the lab. And so with Evoluta, we created a microbial soup, a number of different streptomyces or species that could effectively grow together and teach each other how to eat different kinds of sugars. And if the theory was, if they can teach each other how to eat different kinds of sugars, then what we have to do is kind of take them through their paces and teach them how to eat pumpkin waste or oatmeal, because we were identifying within the industrial agriculture food system where waste exists that we could reincorporate into our process. And so building out different technical protocols, we were able to create a microbial consortium of about 5 different strains of streptomyces that eventually got quite good at eating a range of different food waste streams. And our part in the project was to stress test those consortia on our microbial protocols, the protocols that we use to then dye the textiles. And it was really special because we saw things that we didn't anticipate sort of emerge. From a color fastness perspective, this process was actually better than ours. And so when we took everything to the lab for testing, we came back with much better results than previously. Our global warming potential decreased 3.5-fold during the process. So again, this was bolstering those claims that we can make to the consumer down the line. And in terms of throughput, we were able to dye more. And so there's this really interesting thing. If you let nature do what nature does, suddenly the output can be a lot better than human intervention alone. And what was also really special about this process was just looking very closely at the aesthetic finish, and you do this if you're a textile designer, if you're a designer with nuance, and we could see that these microorganisms together dye the textile in a slightly different way than the single organism, and so that's also really important to pay attention to. So the project really taught us that there is a value chain that is soil to soil with the processes that we are developing. If you have a regenerative farm like Grow Farm in London, it is possible for them to supply Silo, a restaurant in London that is zero waste, with produce. And that part of Silo's zero waste strategy is to give some of that to us to put into our lab processes so that we can use those sugars to dye textiles. And that is a really important model that at scale and through the last project I'll share with you, we've been sort of stress testing. Field Biolabs is R&D that is funded by Arcadia, that has been taking place in Friesland, in the sort of northern Netherlands, where their key industry is dairy farming. Now Friesland is, because of sea water level rises, being flooded. And so as a community, I think there's a lot of effort right now about thinking about what are our bioregional futures, if not dairy farming. And so we were tasked to bring in the biological lens, asking whether or not biotechnology has a role to play for the future of this region. And again, it comes back to relationships, because the key step that we sort of had to take from the get-go is, okay, if you want to have a bioeconomy that is driven by biotech, who needs to be at the table? And we identified organic dairy farmers as being key stakeholders, linen production, since they're linen farms, being key sources of the kind of materials that a region like that could actually be producing, technology development partners who are on the ground, as well as the cultural side. This is a really interesting project because I just want to say, who funds R&D? We have this sense that it's just the likes of Innovate UK or grant funding from academic pathways, but I just want to flag that cultural institutions have been funding this current R&D for a really long time, whether they realize it or not. And it's very special that a cultural institution that wants to understand how to integrate technology with the social dynamics of a place is backing research like this. And so we brought together the different kinds of stakeholders who would make it possible effectively for this textile piece to be made. It's a linen that has been grown locally. We did a technology transfer with the local university so that we could dye fabric. That alone is a lesson around IP. How do we structure our IP when we're sharing technologies in a way that is equitable, in a way that things can scale quickly, since biology wants to be distributed? And so, you know, you look at these textiles and you say, oh, this is really nice, but actually on the back end, it's all of these questions about what relationships do we need and how are we going to hold those relationships so that we can move fast once trust is established. The opportunity to push this pilot further was part of this brief, and so we're looking at how we distribute biology through the kinds of infrastructures we now need. This is a field to find biofab lab designed primarily to make textiles on site, and looking at the Boone family farm to see where we can actually leverage some of the resources that are coming through from the farm. The compost heap will sort of get really, really hot, about 78 degrees Celsius. So how do you take and sequester some of that heat to power your fermentation? This is how we start to build a truly regenerative cycle where we can actually make use of all of the resources on the ground to power the fermentation. And depending on the typology of these modular pieces, if you're growing them in a linear fashion on this site, you can then tap into not the compost waste, but the cow bed waste. And the special thing about that is cows are there 24/7, which means you can produce 24/7, whereas the other variety is more seasonal because compost in Europe is seasonal. So I'm going to finish now, and I'm going to finish with this really cool slide. I saw this online a couple of weeks ago, and I just thought, this guy is going to get her there on time. There's a lot of ingenuity going on here. There's courage, there's inspiration. And I just thought, you know, what are we doing in our lives to affect these models? With that mindset of, do you know what, this is really, really hard, but I'm going to make it work, and I'm going to get it there on time. And I think it's a call to action to say, a lot of the stuff that I've shared today, it's really hard work. It's really ugly work. I show you nice slides, but behind it, it's really tough. And we don't have a politics to accommodate it. We don't have an economic paradigm to truly see these visions come to life. And so part of the job that we have, and as designers, is to not just design the materials, design even upstream how the organisms talk to each other. It's what is the political and economic paradigm that is going to make the futures I think we all want to talk about over the next couple of days possible. Thank you.